The NFL regular season is almost here, and the AFC South has plenty of interesting storylines. We're starting with Houston, of course. CJ Stroud coming off an incredible rookie campaign. Can they recreate that magic in his sophomore season? The Jags, Trevor Lawrence, he just got paid. The Jags are trying to bounce back from a late season collapse last season. The Colts ready to go with a healthy AR, and it's an all-new look Titans team with Will Levis. They went to work in the offseason getting Tyler Boyd, L'Jarius Sneed, Tony Pollard, and Calvin Ridley. Mainly a lot of offensive weapons for Will Levis. And we have an AFC South training camp breakdown with the one and only Ryan Wilson. We're going to go for your stars from camp and then someone who could be fighting for a roster spot. We're going to start with the favorites to win the division, Ryan. That is the Texans. Expectations, of course, are very, very high after what we saw from CJ Stroud last season. The season tickets are sold out, so kick us off with your star.
What a wild time to be a Texans fan. 12 months ago, if you said this team would be in running for the division, we would probably all think that we got lost somewhere in a time machine. But here we are. C.J. Stroud has worked wonders for that team. But I'm going to go to the other side of the ball, Jacqueline, because that offense is in pretty good shape. They didn't have a first-round pick. But in the second round, they got Kamari Lassiter, the cornerback out of Georgia. I think he's a star in the making. He made it clear early on during OTAs that he was probably going to be the starter, and that has since been the case. He'll play opposite Derek Stingley Jr., their former first-round pick. And the only reason Kamari lasted until round 2 is because he ran into the 4.6s during the pre-draft process. Plays way faster than that, and the Texans clearly saw value, so they got him in round 2. And he has absolutely had a fantastic training camp and preseason, and he is scheduled to be the starter. So that's great news for that secondary. Meanwhile, let's go back to the offense in terms of a guy who's fighting for a roster spot, and it's going to come down to crunch time here. Robert Woods, the veteran wide receiver who's played previously for the Rams and the Bills. This wide receiver crew is so deep. You talked about Stephon Diggs. He's been added to the mix in the offseason. They drafted Tank Dell last year. They paid Nico Collins. And Robert Woods, the grizzled veteran, might be on the outside looking in when they make those final roster cuts, Jacqueline.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when we think about how much depth that this Texans team has to where there's veterans that are going to be fighting for a roster spot. Let's talk about the favorites to win the division last season, of course, the Jacksonville Jaguars. They lost 5 of those final 6 games, ultimately missed the playoffs. And your star, of course, is the Jags' first-round pick out of LSU, Brian Thomas Jr.
Jacqueline, not to rub salt in the wounds, but are the Jaguars the Florida Gators of the NFL?
Whoa, that is uncalled for, Ryan Wilson. Come on. You know that's my NFL team. That's my alma mater. Like, come on, bro. It's been a rough couple of years, but, like, let's just stick to Brian Thomas Jr. and how he's going to be an absolute stud. All right?
That's on me. My bad. I went too far. I know where your line is now. Get Mayor Pete Briscoe on me for that one. But yes, Brian Thomas Jr., great news in Jacksonville. They have their burner wide receiver. They desperately needed help at that position. They went out and got Gabe Davis in the offseason as well. Christian Kirk is healthy, and I think Brian Thomas Jr., the stud out of LSU, who was oftentimes in the shadow of Malik Neighbors, the first-round pick who ended up with the Giants. But he made a living last year running go routes and having Jaden Daniels throwing the ball typically in the end zone. And I think this is a great find for Trevor Lawrence. And you talked about them struggling late last year. A lot of that had to do with Trevor Lawrence being banged up and playing through injury. He's healthy now. The offensive line should be better. And obviously having a deep threat like Brian Thomas Jr. clearly helps. In terms of a guy who might be on the outside looking in, this is another super athletic, big, strong, fast wide receiver who was a former second-round pick of the Jets out of Baylor, Denzel Mims. I remember seeing him at the Senior Bowl back when he was coming out, thinking this kid has a chance to be special. He's never been able to put it together. He's had several stops around the NFL after leaving New York, and it may be a case where there's so much depth here on this wide receivers for the Jacksonville depth chart here that it could be that Denzel Mims ends up getting cut as well.
All right, let's go to the Colts. It's someone that we both love talking about. Speaking of the Florida Gators, a healthy Anthony Richardson this season for Indy. They're plus 310 to win the division. A lot of folks are like taking them as their sleeper team in the division, but we're going to go to their first-round draft pick when it comes to their star from camp as well, Ryan.
That's right. Last year, Anthony Richardson was their first-round pick. This year, they went to the other side of the ball and got Laiatu Latu, who ended up being the first defensive player off the board, I believe, at pick 14, which is a wild thing to think about when you talk about the imbalance of offensive and defensive players. But if you're going to take someone from the defensive side of the ball, Laiatu Latu is a great selection. He battled injuries early in his career. He was originally at Washington, transferred to UCLA, and he was unstoppable last season. And we talked a lot about him, me and Rick Spielman on the With the First Pick podcast, because he is a technician in terms of how his pass rush moves, and it showed up week in and week out. And he's been flashing at camp and in preseason as well. And I think he offers Kwity Paye some much-needed help at the edge rush position, especially with Ebukam out with the injury. In terms of a guy who might not make the cut when it's all said and done, we talked about Anthony Richardson. They went out and got the Colts did Joe Flacco as the veteran backup, and he feels like a shoo-in to be that backup. And because of the rules now with the quarterbacks where you can keep two on the roster and then elevate someone from the practice squad on game days, Sam Ehlinger might be the odd man out here. The former Texas player was a day 3 pick, had a chance to start a few years ago. His NFL future is probably most likely as a backup long term, but he may have to do it from the practice squad when the final cuts come down in a few weeks here, Jacqueline.
Yeah, we saw that starting record 0-3, so not great for him. Let's go to Tennessee because this is all new for the Titans, right? They have a new coach, new starting quarterback, new weapons on offense as well for Will Levis. Tell us who your star is for them.
Again, it's their first-round pick, J.C. Latham, who was an absolute monster at Alabama. He played on the right side of Alabama. We talked to him at the Combine, and if I'd been standing on Rick's shoulders, J.C. Latham was still taller than us combined. But he has been since moved to the left side, which is an interesting development when you talk about putting a rookie out there day one against NFL pass rushers. But he more than held his own in week 1 of the preseason. He gave his grade last week, quote-unquote C. But I think he has an opportunity to be truly special because he's lining up next to Peter Skoronski, their first-round pick from last season. And that left guard, left tackle combination is going to do wonders for the run game and also, of course, for Will Levis, who took a ton of hits last year. You talked about the new coach, the new OC, the new offensive line coach, and Brian Callahan's dad. And then I think this offense has a chance to be much better. It's not much better if you're Malik Willis, however, because the former third-round pick, he might be the one looking for a job when it's all said and done. They signed Mason Rudolph, the longtime Steelers backup, to now be the backup for Will Levis. We know Will Levis it's his job, and he's going to keep it for the entire season as long as he's healthy. But Malik Willis, who's flashed at times with the athleticism and the arm strength, but hasn't been able to put it together, he wasn't drafted by this front office. He wasn't drafted by this head coach. And unless he puts on a big show this week in week 3, Jacqueline, he may end up being on the outside of the 53-man roster.
Now, Ryan, when we look at your stars in total for the Jags, the Colts, and the Titans, all of those stars on your list are the team's first-round picks as well. Of course, we know you mentioned you and Rick, you have your podcast with the first pick. You've gone to the Combine, the drafts. You've studied these guys as prospects. Do you kind of feel like a proud dad right now when you're like seeing these guys be the stars of camp and you know their journey and how they got there and everything?
Yeah. Actually, it's sad, but you've hit the nail on the head because you've known these kids for so long. A lot of times coming out of high school, right, and then they work their way through college, and you get a chance to talk to them. And Jacqueline, a little future heads up for you. When you get older, you start to appreciate how smart and articulate and hardworking these young people are. So you do feel good. You feel like you're sending your kid off to college and they're having success. And just hopefully they send some checks back home here so I can pay the rent.
Ryan Wilson, always good to see you, my friend. An AFC South camp breakdown where, of course, the Texans are favored to win the division. And you're getting a look at the odds there. The Jags right behind them at +270, followed by the Colts and the Titans, who are the long shot to win the division. Just 14 days to go until the regular season kicks off. We got a lot of AFC South action on CBS for week 1, including the Texans and the Colts matching up the Jags as well as they face Miami. Just 2 weeks to go, and a reminder, you can stream all the action on Paramount Plus as well.